So as we're getting into final project and midterm territory, I figured I would do a video speaking directly to the process of taking a database and then working with it in your code. Now, this is going to be over a series, and we're not going to cover database connectivity this week because that will take up an entire week's worth of lectures by itself. But what I wanted to do is at least show you an example of how you should be thinking when you're going from a database with tables and then creating your business models so that you can start to work on that and get that in place. So what I've done is I started just a class library called adventureworks.business, and I did that by going File, New, and choosing New Project. And I chose class library and I just gave it a name. So this is just a standalone class library. When it builds, it would build into a DLL file. You can do this within your existing application if that's the direction you want to go. Considering the lecture videos and the lecture application don't line up with the application that you're building for the final project, I'd recommend starting off with a new Windows form application and then adding a new class library project to that solution. And then that way you'll end up having what you need. So basically following similar steps to what we did in the lecture videos, but create a new project and a new solution for your final. And if you need help with that, please feel free to ask. So adventureworks.business. So the way that I'm approaching this is I actually have Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio up, open, and connected to my local instance of AdventureWorks. If you have questions on how to install that, I would recommend going back and looking at the prior lecture videos. And the table I'm going to attack first is going to be the customer table. So I'm going to open that, open up columns, and you'll see a list of all of the columns within the customer table. Now this isn't always the best view, so probably the better option if you're really needing to look at the details of the table is to right click on the table and choose design. And what that'll do is not Visual Studio, Microsoft SQL Server will open up and provide you with the full definition of the table and its columns. And this is important because you'll want to know what the data types are for each one of these columns as you're working to build the class that represents this table. All right, so let's kind of take this a step at a time. So our table is called customer. So I'm going to jump into Visual Studio. I'm going to right click. I'm going to do add. Let's start by adding a folder for our models. And then I'm going to right click on models, choose add. I'm going to add a class. So this class will match the name of my table. So I'm going to call it customer. Now I'm going to make this class public. And then we're going to start adding properties to this class. And those properties will match the column names from the customer table. So let's just start with customer ID. So the way I look at it is we have a column name and a data type, and we want to match those up within our application. So the column name is customer ID and the data type is int. So I'm going to create a public int property called customer ID. And for me, I'm just going to use the shorthand get set because I'm going to be pulling data in and out of the database using these properties. All right, so that would be the first column. The next one is called name style, and the data type here looks like a custom name style bit. So for now, I'm just going to assume a bit is a data type that is an integer, and it's usually a small one between 0 and 255. So I'm going to go with a byte data type for this, and then we'll go back and look at the actual data and see what it needs to be. So public byte, and that was called name style. So now our next one is title, and that's a varchar or an nvarchar 8. So that'll still be a string for us. So public string title. And we have custom name data types, but they're still nvarchar values. So we have first name, middle name, last name, and suffix. And those are all just strings for us. And I'm doing prop double tap string, double tab last name. That's how I'm doing these quickly. And I'm using the snippets in order to do that quickly. All right, so we've got those in. So now we have company name, salesperson, and email. So again, prop string, company name, salesperson, and my last one was email. All right, so now we can keep on moving down. So we have phone, password hash, password salt, row GUID, and then modify date. So we'll do phone, which is just a string for us. And then the password hash and salt are both string values. The row GUID is a unique identifier. Now, a GUID is a globally unique identifier, and that's actually a data type within .NET. So we can go public GUID, and we can say row GUID. And then the last one is date modified, or modified date, which is a date time. So we'll do pop date time, which is our data type, and we'll call it date modified. So we've now created a class that represents the columns in the customer table. So this is the process that we would follow for any of our models that we want to create to mimic our AdventureWorks database. Address would be another one. Products obviously would be another one. So let's go with customer address, and we'll open this up. Now, customer address gets interesting because it has a customer ID field and an address ID and an address type. So this acts as an in-between table for a many-to-many relationship. So let's actually, before we jump into customer address, let's go into address and let's build out this table as a class. So we'll right-click on models again, add class, and we'll call this one address. And we can say public class address. And then we have address ID, address list, or I'm sorry, address line 1, 2, city, state, province, country, region, postal code, row GUID, and date modified. Now we'll go through and do prop, int, address ID, prop string, address line 1, and modified date. All right, so we now have our address class in place. So let's go back now and look at customer address. A customer address carries some interesting elements. It has a customer ID, an address ID, an address type, a row GUID, and date modified. So row GUID and date modified are pretty common ones. So I'm just going to copy it from an existing class. So we'll right click on models, do add class, and we'll call it, just make sure I got my naming correct, customer address. And now this will be a public. We've got those two properties to put on the end. So we'll do prop int customer ID, prop int address ID, prop string, and I think it's address type. All right, and then the last one we'll do as a demonstration real fast is the product. So we'll do models, right click, add class. We'll create a product class. And we'll start out with a public. And inside of the product table, we have product ID. And we have name, product name, and color as all strings. And we have standard cost and list price are labeled as money, so we'll treat those as floats. It's standard cost and list price. And then the size is a string and the weight is a decimal, so we'll treat that as a float as well. So we have product category ID, model ID. And then sell start date, sell end date. We have a discontinuation date. There's actually a var binary max, which is a thumbnail photo. So we're going to treat that as a byte array. So that's called thumbnail photo. And we have a thumbnail file name, which will be a string. And we have that row GUID and the modified date. I just pasted that in because I already had it in my clipboard. All right, so those are our models. Now, I would advise that as you're building your application, either go through up front and build out all your model classes so that you have them ready for yourself when you start to actually build your application, or you can build them as needed, but you will need them because once we start talking about doing integrations with the database and setting these up to be our data transfer objects as well, that'll be very important for you to have them in place and ready so that you can start to do your actual work by pulling data out of the database and loading it into these objects.